This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 140.
And teachers can't do anymore. Where teachers are maxed out and they're working incredibly hard, and most care very deeply about their students. But what we're not doing is giving them the advantage of what this neuroscience can tell us, which is that we can actually improve. We can have students who come to our classrooms better prepared to learn. We're more focused, better able to learn, better able to remember, better able to keep things in mind. It makes it way easier. So if we want to look for where the leverage is.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt the Pole Vaulter Rogers. Matt, we talked some track, some decathlon, and some brain and cognitive functioning today. What a conversation.
Yeah, if you listen to these episodes, you know that I am just the straight shooter as the host. I ask direct questions. They don't deviate whatsoever. They're very clear all the time. Ken, is the elaborator, and just, you never know where he's coming. The real wild card, to be honest.
Yeah, I'll talk for 5 minutes and then turn it to the guest and not even ask a question, but expect them to answer.
That never happens to me.
So we had Betsy Hill on our podcast today, and she does have experience as a teacher, but she hasn't been teaching for a long time. She's transformed her career into studying the brain, studying cognitive functions, studying executive functioning, which you and I both learned that we only knew about 1/3 or 2/3 of what executive functioning even is. And I think for most teachers, they'll feel the same in those conversations that you hear circling through professional development nowadays. What was your single biggest takeaway from the conversation?
So I'll say it comes up later in the episode, but I think when talking about the brain, at least for me, when they use technical terms like cortex and frontal lobe and these type things, I tune out. Like it sounds too technical. And then the other things that go along with that sound so simple and obvious that I also feel like I tune it out. So I can tell you, like, executive functioning skills are important, but it's really difficult to define because a lot of times it sounds so obvious. And so we, as good teachers, integrate executive functioning skills just naturally without necessarily understanding the why behind it, which as educators, where our students ask us the why behind what we're teaching, that was the biggest takeaway for me is we're learning about features and development and the ever-growing possibility of the brain to enhance what we're good at, but definitely enhance what we could use practice in, regardless of how strong or weak you are in different processing modalities.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, there's a lot of research talk, and I felt like the conversation was very relevant. It was, it's easy to become disconnected when it goes down this rabbit hole sometimes for us teachers, but Betsy was very relevant and kept it very connected to the classroom. So I think our listeners are going to gain a lot from this conversation and feel there is a lot of value in how we can approach teaching and learning. So I say we jump right into the conversation with Betsy Hill after we hear from Teach Better. Hi, Betsy. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing today?
I am well, thank you. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start things off nice and simple here. Please officially introduce yourself to our audience. Let us know where you are coming from and give us a snapshot of your career in education?
Okay. Well, I am coming to you from a little north of the beautiful city of Chicago, and it's sunny and very warm today. So that's a good thing. I started off I assume that we can skip over like kindergarten and things like that, but my career in education began when I was graduating from college, and I had double majored in French and Russian and decided I wanted to teach. So I started teaching foreign languages in high school. And there were parts of it that I loved and parts of it that I found very frustrating. And like many teachers, I defected after about 3 years. But I was always very interested in education and involved in the high school that I had gone to. I was very involved in, served on the board of trustees of Chicago State University for about 14 years. Continued to read. I was very interested in how the brain managed language. And, there were some of my students that picked things up so quickly and some that just really struggled with it. And I didn't have the things in my toolkit to address that. So that was, uh, part of the impetus to go try to do other things, but was interested in the brain all along the way. And that's what I do now. So I actually still teach today. I teach in an MBA program. I teach strategic thinking. I sometimes describe myself as a recovering educator.
That's a great way to put it. So I'm really excited about this conversation because a bulk of our guests are classroom teachers, and we learn about their passions and the way they approach instruction. And there's always common themes, but teachers approach it a little bit differently depending on the demographic of students they work with, the subject they teach, the age level they teach. But we have had other guests on that are authors and keynote speakers, and we did have um, a psych like a psychology researcher on that talked to a lot about motivation and the science of motivation. And so I think it's really important for us as educators to hear and learn from other colleagues, but also to kind of dial it back and think about how does learning take place and how does the brain best learn, so that we can make sure that we are using the correct strategies to best provide students with appropriate instruction that's going to help them learn the content that we're trying to teach. So I'm going to lean on you a little bit here, Betsy. Where can we start with this and what you've learned with the brain, whether it's related to how language is learned, or what was kind of like the initial aha moment for you to really take this full-fledged and make a career out of studying the brain?
Well, I think one of the early sort of aha moments was when I started, working with brainware and really started to understand at a different level of depth that intelligence isn't just one thing. Number one, it's a whole bunch of different processes, and it's also something that isn't fixed. I think a lot of people, I know a lot of people still believe that we come into the world with a certain amount of intelligence or capacity or intellectual ability, or however you want to refer to it. And then was sort of stuck. I mean, I think as a classroom teacher, and I remember when I was young, we could all say, okay, here are the smart kids and here are the dumb kids. And it's really not good. It's not factual. It's not accurate. And I think a lot of teachers know that, but also struggle with the fact that typically there are kids who do well with a bunch of things and others who struggle. But what that masks is that we all have cognitive strengths and weaknesses, and these skills, these mental processes that our brains use to take in, store, retrieve, manage, organize information, we all have strengths and weaknesses. And when we understand what those are, then we can understand a whole lot about learning. So that's probably a good place to start. And to start also with suggesting, there are some of the cognitive skills that the teachers are probably pretty familiar with. We all are, one is attention. It turns out that there are a bunch of different attention processes, but We all know kids who struggle to stay focused, to stay on task. Um, Sometimes when I'm doing presentations, I've with a group of teachers, I will ask every teacher who has a classroom full of students with good attention skills to stand up. Never had anybody stand up, uh, and that one's that's pretty obvious. And there are others that we don't necessarily appreciate. That when we start to delve into them, we can get insights into how our students learn that really can help us. So one example of that is our long-term memory skills. And it turns out that some people have a better memory for verbal information, and some people have better information memory for visual information. And in fact, most of us have one that's stronger than the other. Sometimes people have really strong skills in both, and sometimes they have really weak skills in both. But if you think about a child who has really strong visual memory, it's like everything they see, they remember. Charts, graphs, diagrams, images, what the football field looked like, how many people were on, just it just sticks with them. And then you have other students who remember what they hear. They remember, the words of a song very easily, or they remember a poem really easily, or they remember whatever it was the teacher was talking about yesterday, giving instructions. So now think about a typical assignment that a teacher would give to learn some new vocabulary words. Well, if you're a child with good verbal memory, then the typical vocabulary assignment is going to make a lot of sense. And you've probably done these, write the word, write the definition of the word, write the word in a sentence. That's a great way to learn vocabulary if you have really strong verbal memory skills. If you have strong visual skills and weaker verbal memory, that task is going to be excruciating. It's going to take a long time. And at the end of the day, it's not going to result in very good learning of that vocabulary. So this is, a simple way that we can, when we understand, it's not just about preferences, it's about it being able to scientifically measure the strength of these skills. Then we can give that stronger visual memory learner the task to create pictures and associate pictures with words, which is going to be far more effective for them. So that was a long answer to your first question.
That was a great answer.
Yeah, to jump into it, and I'll share, and maybe I'm doing this earlier than I should. I feel like what I learned, at least in pre-teaching instruction, and even into current and like being like Ken is a father and what have you, we learn naturally a lot about the development of the brain of very young kids. That is very common, and we have to understand that development and those type features. But it seems like when you get to a certain level, like what gets pressed towards me, I'm a fourth grade going to be a fifth grade teacher, is present instruction visually, present it auditorily, present it kinesthetically, so that the students, based off their learning strengths, will have access to that information. And realistically, for a lot of us, or maybe it's just me, I feel like the scientific brain research is kind of like, that'll generally cover everything. Can you kind of speak to the development of the brain specifically in the different tiers of education? Because a lot of times, and I don't know if it's, a 10-year-old or a 14-year-old have so many changes that it's hard to isolate what is the brain development compared to, seeing easier trends in a younger child.
Right. So there are a couple of concepts that are embedded in your question. And one of them is the idea of windows of development or critical developmental stages. And And the idea behind that is that there are certain periods of time during which certain skills develop, and then it becomes much more difficult. So a really easy example is foreign language, where um, when we are born, we can hear the sounds of all the 6,000 languages that there are in the world. And then we start to prune those away. And by the time we're somewhere around 10 to 12, it's much more difficult to learn the sounds of other languages, to recognize them, and so that's why most kids, by the time they're learning language, has a great deal of difficulty speaking without an accent, and most won't ever be able to speak with a native's accent. And that's one of those developmental windows. And it doesn't, absolutely shut the for most skills. It turns out that the brain is more plastic, more malleable, and can change more than anybody ever thought, or that most of us realize. And so with really very specific training, you can speak much more like a native speaker, and you can adapt that even as in college or later than that. It's going to be easier for some people than others, and there's so that idea that there are windows of time sort of made us say, okay, well, if my students haven't learned to do X by the time they're in my class, they're just never going to get it, right? I might as well not bother. So that's one thing we have to keep in mind. And then the other thing is that there are skills that develop over a long period of time. So there's a special group of cognitive skills called executive functions. And you probably heard that term. It's being used a lot in education today because these skills are very predictive of academic performance, of behavior, of things that we'll do as adults, including how much money we're going to make, whether or not we're going to be healthy. So executive functions are really important. And most teachers tend to think of these as self-management, self-regulation. And there is that component to them, but there are actually three executive functions. One is working memory, which is our ability to hold information in our mind while we think about it. One is inhibitory control, which is very much related to that self-regulation, not being impulsive. And then the third is cognitive flexibility. That's our ability to shift our mindset. So when people in the world learned that the earth was not flat, but round, that had to change a whole bunch of different ways that we thought about things in life. You can also think about it as what we do when our first approach to a problem doesn't work and we have to shift gears and think of something new. So these executive functions, which mostly happen in the front part of our brain, our frontal lobe, which is right behind our foreheads, this is the last part of the brain to develop. Our brains develop, they mature from the back, which is where our vision is. So we develop our vision really early in life, as Ken knows from watching your baby start to track you and start to be able to reach for things, and all of those, they're developing those visual skills as they interact with the environment. And that's, I guess, another really important aspect of these skills, is that they don't just happen; they happen in interaction with the environment. And so what happens to us in our environment, our opportunities to develop, are going to have a big impact. But in general, our brains have this back to front kind of development. And on average, for most people, our executive functions are not fully mature until, you want to guess? Mid-20s? They're saying even 30. Now think about the fact that if you wanted to rent a car, to sign a contract to rent a car, you have to be 25. So and these skills, of course, are going to keep you safe when you're driving. They're going to make your behavior less risky on the road, and in all kinds of other ways. So the car companies got it right for probably not knowing anything about brain development, but just based on, the statistics of it. So that's the other thing.
No,
go ahead, Ken.
Can I ask you a question about the development of the frontal lobe? I've heard many times and read some research about how development it starts at birth, even though it's going, back to front, and the development of the frontal lobe slows down at the age of 5 and then continues to develop again at the age of 18. Have you seen or heard any of that? Any Is that something that I'm seeing that's not factually based?
I have not seen that. So I don't know of any reason that that would be. So what I there are some things that happen, some sort of unique things. So you probably remember the terrible twos. So
Mm-hmm.
that what's happening is that our brains, um, learning is really the creation of all these connections among the neurons in our brains. And so we create trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions. It's like 1.2 synapses per second or 1.8 synapses per second from the time we start to develop until we're like 2. It's enormous. And by the time we're 2, we've overproduced connections. We have too many connections. And so that's why 2-year-old behavior is 2-year-old behavior, because they have too many connections and it's causing them to have a lot of conflict with, they can think of 18 things to do and they're torn and it's, challenging. So what our brains do at that point is they start to prune. They get rid of the synapses that aren't useful. And so at that point, and then we start to strengthen and keep on working on those connections that are the most useful. So it may be that there's a phase when we're about 5, except that it really doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, you can throw away what I said because you know a lot more than me, and now I at least know not to
I can't
repeat
think
it
of
ever
any.
again, other than the fact that I did it on air. So please, but I'm glad I had that clarified. So please continue with what you were saying about executive functioning,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
um,
So these skills, actually, it turns out that cognitive skills in general, although executive functions play a huge role in it, account for 50% of the variance in academic outcomes, more than any other factor. And I think a lot of teachers can probably tell you this, that, what kids bring to the classroom in terms of ability to learn has a huge impact on what they are actually able to learn. And you see kids, I happen to be a very good student. I got school. It worked perfectly for me. I could remember things. I could understand things. Um, but we work with a ton of kids for whom that's not the case. And I had a ton of students for whom that was not the case. They couldn't remember. They couldn't, in fact, we've seen a big impact of COVID on memory skills. At least it seems to be that way. And anecdotally, when I say that, teachers go, "Oh yeah, the kids are less." And I'm seeing Matt nod his head. So that the kids are less able to remember things. So that phenomenon that we experience as teachers so often, where we say, "Well, we covered that yesterday," or "I told you that before." Or we say, that we tell the kids things one day and they can't remember them the next. That's literally true. And it's not because, a lot of times, it's not because they weren't paying attention. They were paying attention, but it just isn't sticking in the way that it needs to, because those are, all of these skills are interdependent, but they are, we can identify those stumbling blocks and those weaknesses. So if you have a child, for example, who has weak inhibitory control, you're going to probably see a child who, number one, does things impulsively. They may hit somebody, they may blow out the candles on somebody else's birthday cake, they might, blurt things out in class. And it's also, they're probably much more likely to blurt things when they're reading. So, and it's not because they're just guessing at words, it's actually the inhibitory control that is making it difficult for them to suppress this word that came into their mind. If you have a child with weaker working memory or less working memory capacity. You're going to have a child who is going to probably have a difficulty following a set of instructions. So if you say, Johnny, would you please go, hang up your jacket and then go and put your homework in the homework folder and then sit down at your desk to turn your book to chapter, page 22. Johnny may get to the hanging up his jacket and then he may come back and he may look like a deer in headlights, like he has no idea what he's supposed to do next. And it's not that he doesn't want to cooperate. It's just that he is not holding that information in his mind. He's also probably going to struggle with reading comprehension, because what we're doing when we're reading is the part of our mind, our conscious processing, is actually working memory. And so when we're holding information and trying to relate it to what we already know, that happens in working memory. So working memory has a big contribution to reading comprehension. And then if you think about cognitive flexibility, so a child with difficulty in that area is probably going to struggle in general life, just maybe shifting between activities or seeing things from other people's perspectives. The kids who I'm right, there's only one way to look at this. But also they're going to probably struggle, even if they're really smart and have good problem solving skills in general, they're going to struggle because if they hit one of those situations, which we all are going to hit at some point, where your approach to solving that problem doesn't work, then you're stuck and they're going to get very frustrated. So one of the important things about executive functions is understanding that these are not just behavioral, they're not just academic. They're the same cognitive processes no matter what situation you're in. We have one brain, we take it everywhere we go.
All right, I'm gonna try something, and hopefully it's not a swing and miss like Ken's. So,
well, I don't know. I'm really intrigued. There's a lot of new stuff coming out. I'm going to go look it up afterwards, and we'll have to.
We might have to put a disclaimer,
right? But that's not what I've heard.
So I'll use a life analogy, and bear with me. Feel free to pause me if I'm not being clear. So in college, I ran track, and I did an event called the Decathlon, which is a bunch of different events. Some throwing, some running, some jumping. And I actually just saw this yesterday on Twitter from my old coach. He said, if you were to have an athlete that you have one opportunity to train, would you train what they are good in to make them good towards elite, or would you train what they are weak in to make those slightly better? The connection that I'm trying to make is, I'll use myself as an example as a learner. I had an auditory processing delay as a learning disability as a learner, and I found that once I found a study and moving information into working and then more permanent memory, once I found that strategy, it was more helpful for me to stick with just that strategy. In other words, take a good skill, make it closer to elite, rather than trying to do a weaker skill and make it slightly better. Which do you think, as a teacher, it makes more sense? Is it make more sense to say, I know this kid visually struggles, but auditorily might be on grade level. I'm going to more emphasize keeping them on grade level? Or is it a better responsibility to say, I know this is weak, I'm trying to support that to become more well-rounded?
It's a great question. And what I would, so I'm not going to fall for the I have to choose one. I'm going to explain.
Fair enough.
I'm going to explain why, how we want to think about this. So when we understand, and both are very important. So when we understand a child's learning strengths, like understood that you maybe had stronger visual processing than auditory, that because you weren't processing those sounds and those words as you probably have developed to be able to understand them now. But that was a struggle. So, but when we know what their strengths are, then we can give them strategies to use them and to continue to strengthen them. And that's something that's a lot easier for a teacher, a classroom teacher especially, without the right resources to do, because you can recognize that, you can help them practice that and become, elite. For a lot of kids, that is going to help them, but it's not going to really get to them to the point where they can keep up with their peers. So if you have and this can happen with bright kids, or, even that have really strong reasoning skills, but have some significant weaknesses, something like processing speed, or something like working memory, or something like spatial perception, those kinds of things can really be stumbling blocks in the learning process. Cognitive flexibility, very much that way. And so if you don't have those skills, or they're very weak, it's going to really stand in the way. You're going to fall behind. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to probably get to the point where I can't do this. I'm not smart. You see those kids who just say, they might become the class clown because they are going to act out to distract from the fact that they're having struggles, or they may just shut down. And the kids who sort of disappear in the class. The reason that's so challenging for a classroom teacher is that these cognitive processes are not things that are very amenable to direct instruction. And that's what we do as teachers. We instruct, we explain. Now, when you did decathlon, did you have to do a pole vault? Was that one of those?
I did.
Oh my gosh, I'm so impressed. Okay.
Well done. Proud of you.
Well, I use this as an example because it's so I call it esoteric. It's something that most of us have not ever, most of us have run around a track. Most of us have done jump around and things like that, but very few of us have pole vaulted. Yeah. And so if I was going to try to direct instruct you to do a pole vault, that to explain to you, I could explain to you how you grab the pole. I could explain to you how you, I don't know, I see them rocking back and forth, and then you take off, and then you plant, whatever. You can explain that, and it's really not going to. The way you do it is by practicing, or like diving, or like something else.
The sensation.
So these are skills that happen at a non-conscious level. So we can't explain to somebody how to hold more information in their mind. We can't explain to them how to focus better. We can't explain to them how to be more flexible. I mean, that just doesn't compute. So, but we can train those skills with the right kind of cognitive training. And that's really what we're starting to see now is something that it can actually be done in schools. It used to be one-on-one therapy, but it's now available in a computer-based format. And we have a program called Brainware Safari that it develops a whole bunch, 43 cognitive skills. So all the skills that we've been talking about, and it's like physical training. It's practicing them. I'm sure you did a lot of cross training. You're developing those different sets of muscles, and then you got to get them all working together. So some of the same principles really apply. And so if you can get a kid who has, very low processing speed up into the range where it might be low, but it's within that expected range, in that sort of middle third.
The bell curve. Yeah.
Huge impact. And what their teachers and their parents will see. So we had a child once, because we do a cognitive assessment at the beginning with everybody that we work with. And this child tested very low, very slow processing speed. Her mother called up one day just beside herself because the school was telling her that she thought her daughter had oppositional defiant disorder, ODD. And this was a child who was a rule follower, wanted to please, wanted to do everything right. There's no way. But what it looked like to somebody at the school was that they would ask this child to do something, and it would take her a long time to process what that was. And so it can look like something that's not. And that's another aspect of this is really when we understand it, we know why things are going on and we can address them appropriately.
So what I find really interesting,
Ken, before you go in, I have to give Betsy kudos because, like any good educator, you use a metaphor that speaks to the person you're talking about. You know, you putting yourself out of your comfort zone. I just wanted to give you kudos for that. That's all.
Okay. Well,
yeah, and really showing us up because I've already exposed myself to not know anything about the brain, and she's now also showcasing that she's a
legitimate
track
features.
expert.
Yep.
Well, I had my boys all ran track, so
Yeah,
none of them did pole vaulting. So that one is a real stretch for me. But
yeah,
well, for the brain, that might not be a bad thing. There are some challenging things that go along with it.
So
sorry to interrupt, Ken.
What I find interesting about the executive functioning, and like you said, that is very popular right now in schools. There's a lot of conversations and professional development related around that. And I will say that the working memory piece and definitely the inhibitory control piece is what I feel bulk of the training and the professional development and the conversation around executive functioning is, not the cognitive flexibility. I personally had not heard that being related into executive functioning, and maybe I'm naive in not knowing that, but that's not circled in the conversation.
No, most teachers don't know that. And in fact, if you were considering working memory as one of the executive functions, you're ahead of most teachers. And this is still not.
It's the inhibitory is really the bulk of that. And what I find interesting now looking at all three of these as a set, when I using a very naive standpoint, when I think about working memory, the ability to hold information, like you said, I'm going to say like, okay, like the child is born with that, like they're doing the best they can. Like that's just the way their brain works. It's going to be hard for us to help them. Inhibitory control, self-regulation. Well, that's something that they can learn. They need to learn to control themselves. Cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift our mindset. Well, that's not a brain function. That's just an attitude thing. We just need to work on their attitude towards problem solving and towards change. So like that's a very naive standpoint, but what you're saying is that these are all brain-based cognitive functions. So if you could give us like one example of a strategy or something that a student or an adult could practice to improve each of those three, I would love to hear that. Even just like a simple analogy or example, just to kind of like get around that. Do you kind of know what I mean? Like how only one of them sounds like it's actually cognitive?
Yeah, I think so. It's, so first of all, I'm going to say that to really develop these skills effectively, you have to develop them in combination and with a lot of repetition, probably beyond that an individual classroom teacher can do, certainly with a bunch of kids. So I'm still going to give you some strategies, but because we can provide our students with opportunities to start to develop them. But we're not going to have the kind of impact that we could if we did cognitive training. So when we do cognitive training, we can see, multiple standard scores improvement, multiple, dozens of percentile points. Trying to think of another way to, half or a full standard deviation improvement in these skills. So I just wanted, explain that. Having said that, we can certainly work on these in the context of a classroom. And it's going to probably require teachers in some cases do some things a little differently than they do. So one one way to work on working memory is to do things that are designed to have you hold things in memory for a longer time, to try to keep it active. One way to do that is to repeat things out loud. And so if there's something really important that the teacher says, having the students repeat it out loud, having them explain it to each other, having them, rehearse it basically. And if it's remembering that exact thing, you just want to rehearse it over and over. If you want to deepen your understanding, you have to elaborate on it and discuss it. And so, peer teaching, after something's explained, is a way to do that. Or, if you give a set of instructions, some of the students might benefit from jotting it down and then, and repeating it. Okay, I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and then I have to do this. And, it's maybe more noise in the classroom than some teachers like, but it will pay a lot of dividends in terms of helping those students with holding on to something in working memory. In terms of inhibitory control, that's a hard one because it is so, basically what it means is you stop yourself from doing something you otherwise would do. And so teachers do a lot of things like stop and count to 5. Even that can be really hard because you have to stop it in that fraction of a second before whatever it is. These are, skills that you don't have time. But if you can help kids develop that practice, and maybe you do it where you're just in a, in a circle, and someone says something, and I say, Ken, it doesn't even matter if it's whatever, the sky is purple. And you want to say, the sky is not purple. Have you count to 5 and then say, the sky is not purple. So it gives you a little chance to wait on that. And then cognitive flexibility. One of the things that we do with a lot of the kids that we work with is we have these like scenarios. So I'll give you one. And let's say that you're in your classroom and you left your pencil on your desk, and you turn around and you're talking to some friends, and you go back and the pencil's missing. So first reaction may be somebody stole it. Now we want to say, okay, now let's think of 3 reasons that it might have happened. So one might be that really cute girl that you're interested in talking to borrowed your pencil to write you a little note and her phone number. Another might be it just fell off the desk. Maybe you should look on the floor. The third could be, so when you, and you can have a lot of fun with this, thinking of things that could have caused it. But so that's a really good way. And another way is to just think about, we all have this experience where, 2 people come to you and they're telling the story of this, they're telling you about the same event, and it's like 2 different things happened. So if you can capture those things as they happen, that's another way to really bring attention and highlight cognitive flexibility.
I guess one of the things that I'm kind of processing is we have worked with students that I guess I'll kind of partner with what you've shared already. We've worked with students that obviously have strengths and weaknesses, and as Ken, in your current role as a secondary educator, we don't want to ignore the strengthening of all skills. But we also can observe students that are developing skills towards future careers. So, for instance, if a kid goes into the high school environment goes into a maybe tech-based position like a CTC style program and absolutely flourishes because school finally completely makes sense. Books and writing and writing, like math in practice, is totally different than, solving an equation type scenario. Is there a realm that you find this cognitive development shifts into professional skill priority as opposed to instructional responsibility? Like, the point that I'll make is, as I was kind of alluding to, once I found strategies that worked, even if the teacher was asking for me to display it in a different way, I would understand it in my way and then provide it or translate it in a way that made sense for said teacher. That's how I got to the point of being able to pass classes, because it was tough for a long time until I figured out what worked. And so we see kids like, I'll use a perfect example. I have a student that I know is going to be wildly successful in an art and craftsman environment. I do not worry about them being a successful human in the future because their conversation skills are fantastic. Their writing and reading are good enough, yet still significantly below level, but their talents are so exceptional that I know that they're going to grow up and be a very, not just functional, but gift to society when they get to that point. It almost feels like we're just biding time until they get to that point. That perfect example, his father is a glass blower. If it gives you some perspective, right? It is in the genetics. They have never, in that family lineage, they are successful human beings because they know where they excel. So what is kind of your view in being in this realm and saying, buddy, like, I know that I'm responsible to teach this, and you need to develop these weaker skills, even though you see such brilliance in other ways?
So I think it all fits with what we've been talking about um, since the beginning of the conversation, which is that these skills have to do with everything, and that we do everything all the academic skills, all the life skills. My guess is, and I see this over and over again, is that that student you're just talking about, as well as the student who goes off into the tech environment and is going to go like crazy, all of a sudden they're going to hit their stride. Um, Probably, if we looked at their cognitive profile, we would see that they had much stronger visual spatial under reasoning, spatial perception, and probably not nearly as strong verbal reasoning as average. Unfortunately, the school system puts such a priority on the written and spoken word, on language, that it leaves not much room for some of those kids with extraordinary talents. There's a genius inside every child. And we just, finding that thing, I'll often talk about careers as finding something we love that loves us back. And that's that combination of disposition, what I find interesting, but also what I'm good at. And when we work with students after they've been through our cognitive training, we actually work with them on being able to articulate and explain what their cognitive skills and strengths are. We have them think about it in the context of a future career, a future profession, and how it would contribute to that, and what they can do to continue to build on that. So I guess that just, absolutely underscore, exclamation point, put a big red star next to it. Absolutely. We need to do those things, and we need to, you know, I just want to take my hat off to you also, Matt, to say that, you're not going to worry so much about those skills that are not as strong, because you don't want to suppress that excellence and that stardom and that enthusiasm and that that passion that are thriving within that child when you help them do what it is that they're so incredibly good at.
Well, and I think that's the hard part as educators because it feels like the weight loss journey that we all have. Like, even if the scale said the number that I wish it said, it never does. We still always feel like there's more that we can be doing. It never feels like we're in actual maintenance. And as a teacher, even if I were to develop to, as you mentioned, that bell curve, almost that below average but functional level of some of these weaker skills, we're still always striving. We're always striving to increase those areas and improve. And that's the beauty of life that, a lot of athletes talk about every day they try to be 1% better than the day before. And that is an academic perspective perfectly too. Like every day, just taking strides forward while having grace for ourselves. I think it's just really, really tough because there are times that they say that I am, as a teacher, supposed to worry about that. 8:15 when the first bell rings, 3:45 when that last bell rings, we know that our brain does not turn off, and especially as empathetic humans, that we don't want to continue or feel obligated to continue to worry and care about our kids and try to figure out how we support them even better. So I guess my question, and feel free to jump in with any thoughts on that, is we're in this for lack of a better word, no-win scenario because there's always work to be done. Where do you find in that best big picture taking first steps to be more, whether that's open-minded to the different learning advantages or to create an environment that allows all learners to see more success on a daily basis?
So I'm going to express it in a way that says that the most underutilized asset in learning and teaching is the student. And what I mean by that is that we are leaving so much potential learning power on the table by not addressing cognitive skills and by not helping our students develop them. So this is not something that the classroom teacher can generally do without the resources and support. They don't have time. They could learn how to do it, but they don't have time to do one-on-one cognitive training with 30 students or 25 students or whatever it happens to be. Although they can do it with the computer-based training. And imagine if, so, we worked this past year actually with a group, in a high school group, where what we saw was this, and they did a great job of implementing the program. And what we saw is that all of the students, every single, on average, all of this, and there was a bunch of weak areas and also some high areas, just the kind of student that you were talking about. And after their cognitive training, all of these skills on average were at least in the expected range. So that means teaching is going to be so much easier because learning is so much easier. And, everything we try to do in education has been for years, putting more on the teacher. You guys know that. You get told, you got to cover this, you got to cover that, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to now give all these tests. And teachers can't do anymore. Where teachers are maxed out and they're working incredibly hard, and most care very deeply about their students. But what we're not doing is giving them the advantage of what this neuroscience can tell us, which is that we can actually improve. We can have students who come to our classrooms better prepared to learn. We're more focused, better able to learn, better able to remember, better able to keep things in mind. It makes it way easier. So if we want to look for where the leverage is, which is, I think, that sort of was the That's you're using a lot of leverage when you're pole vaulting. Go back to my pole vaulting
Totally.
example.
That's right.
you know, so you can pole vault with a pole that has the right kind of springiness, to get to throw you up where you need to be, or you can use one that's less. And if you have a choice, get the right pole, right?
Well, the rough part of this analogy is if you use the wrong pole and it snaps, then you're really in trouble. So, yes, very, very good. Yeah, I guess that makes a tremendous amount of sense, and that idea of I think what's so encouraging is what you're sharing is that there is so much growth compared to more narrow points of views. And I think what's really hard, and Ken, feel free to chime in, what's really hard from my side, Ken and I are very naive compared to the amount of knowledge and research that you have. Our naive perspective, when we don't know something, we jump to common sense, human nature, or our own experiences. So we start filling in these gaps of naturally, this is what you should do. Because, you read any educational book and 94% of it sounds very obvious, and the subtle differences are really reading it slowly and acknowledging that we're not just giving ourselves the benefit of the doubt when it comes to a lot of this work, which we do so often.
Well, most good teachers are teaching in brain compatible ways, if we can use that phrase, because they've figured it out, because it makes sense, because it works. And usually, when they start to learn about what actually happens when the brain is learning, they go, well, that makes sense. And it is reaffirming because it supports what it is that they're doing. And that's one thing. So that's what I see over and over again with teachers who are just really good. It's not that they studied it, but that they figured it out. And it's still the case that most teacher preparation programs never mention the word brain.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
It is. The longer I've been in education, and frankly, the more that we've done this podcast, it does bring up that frustration of the lack of relevancy in what to be teachers are learning in higher education, because so much of it is completely irrelevant to the position that they're going to be in, and the way they're working with students and how they have to support students. And what I've loved most about this conversation is just the idea that these are cognitive functions of the students that can be improved, that they can develop, and that they can overcome or enhance to allow them to then strengthen their other ones and just become better learners, better problem solvers, more successful individuals. And I think, like you said about experienced teachers knowing this, I think a lot of it comes from that experience, and also encouraging that of our students. So I would very often try to work with all of my fifth grade students on organizational strategies and studying strategies, and how to manage themselves doing independent work and managing long-term projects. And I would like to introduce different strategies and say, I'm forcing you or requesting that you try this. And here's why I have it set up this way. Here's why I'm recommending this specific strategy for studying. I would explain it to them and say, you have to try it. You might try it and say, Mr. Herman, that sucked. Like, that didn't work at all. Great. That's fine. Now you know. Someone else is going to say, wow, that really worked. I did really well, or I really understand or remember that content, or I got all my work done and I normally don't get it all done, or my binders are more organized, whatever the case is. So it was this mindset that I approached with my students of, you're still in the phase, and even I am still in the phase of figuring things out. And I would always, spoof on myself a lot and talk about how, the students see me as being, I think students very commonly, especially when there's a good relationship and respect amongst teachers and students, they see the teacher's strengths. They don't see the teacher's weaknesses as much, because I feel like anytime you idolize someone or you respect someone, you focus more on those. My son, the athletes that he's obsessed with, that type of thing. I would always talk about how my short term memory, and maybe that's the wrong terminology, but my short term memory is terrible. I'll walk upstairs and I'll forget why I walked upstairs. My wife will say, make sure you bring this with you when you go to this place. I will listen to her, I will acknowledge it, and I will walk out the door and not do anything that she just told me to do. And so I would tell the kids how, like, when my wife would call, when Mrs. Urban calls me and says, she's somewhere and I'm meeting her and she says, you have to bring this. And I was like, it was a salad to a barbecue. I got my car keys the moment I hung up the phone and I put them in the refrigerator on the salad bowl. I said, that is the only way that in an hour I was going to remember to bring that salad with me, because I would spend 5 minutes looking for my keys and then finally remember they were in the refrigerator. And they would laugh at those things, but it's like this idea of you have to understand how your brain functions and you have to come up with strategies. And so that's why I want to introduce them. And it's just reassuring to know that the brain is as malleable as I thought it was, and that they can pick up these skills and they can develop. And I think it's important for us as teachers to continue to encourage that with our students and to find ways to embed it into the things that we're doing on a daily basis. So I don't want to cut this conversation short, but
can I ask one question actually? So one of the things that I think about often, we hear a lot of advertisements. Kevin and I are getting older, and they, like, friends of mine are starting to do brain games to keep our brain fresh, and that's something that continues. But one of the things that I think is interesting, I obviously went through a bunch of testing in my educational experience and have better knowledge of how my brain operates and percentile and these areas of strength because of reevaluations in the education system and IQ style tests. Do you feel like having an understanding of how your brain functions as a human being, maybe compared to other people, is a asset for students and humans, or almost ignorance is bliss? Because like you said, we're all capable and we can all grow. But sometimes I wonder, is it more helpful or damaging to understand in these realms of success? I know I'm really strong at this asset and I look into that, but the devastation of, like, I'm only in the 30th percentile of this level. Is there any benefit or drawback, especially as, sensitivity is really high? And as leading into, as we get older, continuing to work on that just for, I have Alzheimer's in my family and dementia, like those type attributes of trying to fight against that for general brain health.
Okay, so there are a couple of questions in there, one of which has to do
there totally is
with
yes.
Whether it's good to know your cognitive profile. Basically, I'll just simplify it with that term. And it done the right way, yes, absolutely. So there is the version of, and when we do our cognitive assessments, we share detailed data about strengths and weaknesses with the parent, because that's really important understanding. And so the parent will see if their child is in the 30th percentile or the 10th or the 5th or the 98th, whatever. And you can be in different places, in different cognitive skills. We all have stronger and weaker. We do that for two reasons. One of which is it serves as a baseline, so that then after we do cognitive training, we can see the growth. And so we can measure it in a specific way, and so parents can see that, which we believe is important for them. When we share the information with the student, we don't share that. We share it in a different format. And basically what it does is divide the cognitive skills that are assessed into three categories: their reasoning skills, their memory skills, and their executive functions. And it lists the skills in order from the strongest to the weakest, but you don't know whether there's no numerical association with it, because the focus is very much on strengths for the student. And it's helping them understand their strengths, use their strengths. In the case of executive functions, there's more of a focus actually on the weakest one, because that can be the stumbling block. So they get a primary strategy for using their strongest reasoning skill, a primary strategy for using their strongest memory skill, and a primary strategy for helping support the weakest of their executive functions. And so it makes it very actionable for them, makes it very, um, you know, so from that standpoint, it's really important, but you got to be really careful about just, I think the point that you were making on how you do that. In terms of when we, as we age, most people are concerned about quality of life and brain health. And there is evidence that it's possible to build cognitive reserve. So this is not, we certainly want to build as much of it as we can. It's going to just improve our chances, whether or not we're liable to, have a predisposition for Alzheimer's or something else. We don't know really whether it's going to delay the onset of symptoms. There's, certainly some suggestion that people who are very active and involved, will fare better as they age in terms cognitively. There are a few things that have been shown to be the most effective with that. And it's not crossword puzzles or Sudoku or things like that. Actually, physical exercise is one. Another is learning a new skill, like a new language, or learning to play an instrument that you haven't played before. And another one is the right kind of cognitive training, is, where you're working a whole bunch of different skills. And, as we said, our brains are plastic throughout life, so we can continue to improve those skills even in, middle age and in our senior years, whatever we want to call them. So the key is to do something that's not what you always do. If you always do and you know how to do it, but it's like, this is the great news for teachers. You talk about you want to create lifelong learners. Well, you're going to help them build cognitive reserve if they are always seeking to learn something new and to try something new and to develop new skills.
Well, thank you for tackling two wildly different questions. I wanted to get both of those in before Ken cut me off. So
yeah,
thank you.
I've worked on my working memory, so I, as you can see, able to hold both of those questions in mind and work on them.
That is very evident. Ken would be, checking the refrigerator.
Yeah, very, very impressive. So I do want to be respectful of your time, and I want to jump into the exit ticket, which is the same 4 questions that we ask every guest every week. We might modify them slightly for you with your experience, but the first question I think you can absolutely tackle. What is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
See them. Make sure your student knows you see them.
That's a beautiful thing. I thought about this. I should have said this before the first question. We should have given all 4 questions and see if that working memory would have hung.
Okay, I have my paper and pencil here, because when it gets to 4, I'm not going to promise.
Yeah. So they are all different, and I'm sure you will absolutely hit it out of the park like everything else. This is just a personal thing. Could be personal or professional, but what's the best piece of advice that you've received? And it may have came from a colleague, a supervisor, or a student you worked with.
The best piece of advice that I've received. So I'm going to just tell a really quick story. When my middle son was about 10, I was going through a transition in my work environment. The company was being reorganized, and I was trying to find a home for these little fledgling businesses that I'd been working on. And it was very frustrating. And I would, go in every day with a different strategy or talk to a different group or try, I kept trying. So I was taking Zach to his dance class one night, and I trained my kids to ask the first question they asked when I came home. It couldn't be when's dinner. It had to be something else. So he said, "So how was your day?" And instead of saying, "Oh, well, it was fine," or "I talked on the phone," I started to tell him a little bit about it. And so he listened, and then we got there, and he got out, and he turned back in at the age of 10 and said to me, "So let me get this straight. Right now, they're paying you to argue with them." And all of my tension went away. And I went, you know what? I am being paid to give my best advice, my best understanding. And so I guess the advice is from the 10-year-old was, um, you know, say what you have to say, and always speak the truth, and from your perspective, and that's what people are counting on you for.
That's pretty deep from a 10-year-old. That
Yeah,
is that is very
he was
cool.
unusual. He's now teaching English ninth graders.
That's very cool. So, in your opinion, what is the best way for us to manage times when we're feeling overwhelmed? And that might be related to work or even just general life.
Um, oh, I think everybody sort of comes up with their own way to do that. I think sometime I think it's really good to have. So the thing that I do when I'm feeling like there's just too much going on, there's so much stress, is I go back to whatever the most recent. I listen to one of our customers' testimonials or something like that. I recall a conversation, or I get into a conversation with a parent where I hear what's happened, what we have contributed to a transformation in their child. And that just, remind yourself what's fulfilling about what you do, and just focus on that.
Just a really quick comment because Ken adjusted that one. I think self talk is so critical, and I'm sure in that cognitive development, that self talk. Is there anything that you kind of address in that self talk? Because that self talk often turns negative, especially with this like if a kid is aware that they are successful or not successful, that self talk, I can't type language, is so
Okay,
limiting
so
as
there's
well.
one answer to that, one real quick, one word answer, and that's the word yet. I can't do it yet. And when anytime I hear anybody say, "I can't do that," I add in yet, because that shifts your mind completely into what might be. And it's hard to do something you're convinced you really can't do. But as we've talked about, these are, and the experiences that kids have in our programs really help them realize that they are able to accomplish things they never believed that they could do. It seemed impossible at first. And then they were able to do it. Pole vaulting or whatever the other decathlon events are would probably seemed impossible, but you did it.
I really like that, and like Matt said, I adjusted that question slightly just um, to fit our conversation here. But it's interesting because literally just the guest we had on the previous show shared something similar about when school becomes a struggle, when it's those busy times of the year in the school year. Just going back to student compliments and parent compliments is a nice way to center ourselves, which was very similar to your answer. So, what is the best way for us to continue to adjust to change? So, things are constantly changing for teachers' expectations, curriculum, standards, our leaders. What is a strategy for us to handle those moments of change with a positive mindset?
Um, I guess being clear on what's not, the values, and the the center of your own belief structure that is not changing, and then trying to figure out how these changes can support that. Because if it doesn't make sense, it's like when we try to teach our kids something that they isn't relevant to them, you know. And we say, okay, now we're going to introduce this concept, and it's like, well, why do I have to do that? If we and because you're going to have face it on the SAT or the ACT is not a good answer, and because because it's on the the test is not a good answer. We and this is hard to do with a lot of the content that's in school, unfortunately. But it's not teachers' fault. But if we can't make it relevant to students, so we got to make it relevant to us too. It has to be whatever the change is. We got to figure out how it makes can make better what we believe that is the important part of what we do.
It has been a joy to spend a few minutes with you learning about a topic that you are clearly an expert in. How can our audience continue to follow along with your research and what development you are, gifting the world of education?
Well, our website is a great resource. It's mybrainware.com, BrainWare.com. We do, webinars, and we have a lot of, I have a big archive of webinars on lots of things related to cognitive skills, and you can get PD credit for it by watching those. But things on, if you're interested in any of these areas, cognitive skills, some of our most popular ones have been things about cognitive skills in students with from low socioeconomic status. Because we know about the impact of poverty on cognitive development. So it's it's an important topic, but there's a whole bunch of growth mindset, a whole bunch of other things that people really have enjoyed. So that's something and we also have a book that we just published, and it's designed a lot for parents, but a lot of teachers are parents too, and it's called Your Child Learns Differently, Now What? And you can find more information on our website, or it's available on most of the online booksellers.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Betsy. We will link up to all of that on our show notes page, which can be found on our website at powereduup.com, or wherever you're watching or listening to this. Just scroll down and you'll find all the information there as well. So seriously, thank you so much. This was really insightful and important for us to think about these things and think about how we are approaching our students, not only from a instructional standpoint, but from a cognitive functioning standpoint, to make sure we're doing our absolute best to provide every option and experience for our students, for them to learn and grow as much as possible. So we will encourage our listeners to check out those resources as well as that book. I wrote it down for myself. My oldest child is 5 and my youngest is 2. So I feel like it could be really beneficial for me, because parenting is a whole heck of a lot different than teaching. And so I wrote that selfishly down for myself as well. So thank you again, Betsy.
No, thank you. It was great to talk with you guys, and I loved all the questions.
Well, as we power down this episode, you left us feeling powered up. Thank you for the time. For our audience, we look forward to our conversation next week. Talk to you then.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.